In fact, most of the things they said they did stem from the fact that they got confidence from coming to Labaf and participating in Labaf as young people. They're still young, and from what they've said, from what I've heard, they're definitely going to do great things. She's already doing the Grand Slams that even give people prizes, and he's probably going back to Benue to do a bigger festival than Labaf. And don't also forget the miracle she talked about of her scholarship from doing slam, from almost backing out. If you didn't do that slam that day,
for an open mic,
you know,
it was not a slam. It was
an open mic.
Yes,
yeah.
I just volunteered to perform.
If you didn't do the slam here,
yeah,
you probably wouldn't have had the confidence to do the open mic.
Yes.
So, and they've also said they will continue to encourage young people, in fact, even their own children, if they have children, to come to Labaf. So I think it's safe to say that Labaf is in safe hands. Of course, you talked about bringing some of those festivals or events here as well, so that every year they do Labaf, you can have your own say. And correct me if I'm wrong, you talked about galvanizing younger people so that, you know, you can take over. Give Oga German and Toya Kiyosho the opportunity to see you guys performing, to know that Labaf is in safe hands, even if they decide to retire today. So thank you very much. It's been my pleasure to anchor this. And
okay, sorry, before you end it, if Kemi, are you not doing a poem for us? It's been a poem I've seen. It's been a while since you perform any poem.
I told her since, so she.
So, ladies and gentlemen, please give it up for Kemi as she prepares her poem. I've always known how to set her up from secondary school, so. Yes, thank you. We are waiting for your poem.
I'm glad you're the one who said it, because me, I'm trying to save you time, but.
Okay, can I? Okay.
Yes,
yeah. There's a poem that I would love to.
So you're getting a free performance
from we actually, when she won the slam at Labaf, we started calling her Lagos State Queen of Poetry. And a few days ago, I called her that name and she was like, Ucha, beg, leave me, Jerry. So yes, I present to you our Lagos State Queen of Poetry.
That name wants to make me perform instead of read.
Please, perform then.
Okay. Then I will read my poem after. Okay, let me just do a love poem, then I'll read my poem. I've forgotten the first line. Darling, do you know that the sound of your laugh is the antidote to the sickness of human race? Do you know that your titanic chest is the roadmap to heaven's gates? Now I can't remember the poem again. Maybe I should read first and I'll go back to it. What I will tell you right now. You are too much of fire and you are afraid to burn. You are afraid that when you burn, you will raise down cities. You are too afraid to remind others of their inadequacies. The truth is, they are too afraid to do the same. So burn. It is your destiny to burn. You are the fire sent to Gomorrah, so you must burn. In dark places, you must burn in dark places and see that burning can be beautiful, and see that chaos is not only thing there is to fire, and see that fire burns for different reasons. You are fire. Find your own reason to burn. And burn. It is your destiny to burn. It is your own choice to become a beacon or a chaos. You are fire. It is your destiny to burn.
Okay, so stand up then. Stand up. Stand up now. So let me, since I crushed on her 2 days, for just 2 days, I'll do her a poem. Oh yeah, come. Please stand up, stand up, stand up, stand up. Come close to me, Sila. Come close to me. Come close to me like Moses getting close to the Red Sea. Well, please write that down for me so that I will write a poem with it. I don't know where that came from, but I I think it deserves. So this is a poem titled "Songs for Tokwasi." I can't remember. Okay, I think I performed this poem in a House of Poetry once. So now I'll be performing this one specifically for you. Okay. We go way back. She was my senior in secondary school. She can still flog me. Songs for Tokwasi. Tokwasi. I will open my band of songs and give you tubers of melodies with rhythms well harvested, buttered songs with lyrics of old sung to Nubian queens, echoing to reverberate in your ears like divine orchestra that birthed life along the bank of Nile. Tokwasi. At night, when the moon knocks on our thatch hut, I'll make sounds in new tongues with imageries never known to greatest of bards. My songs for you, Tokwasi, my songs for you, Tokwasi, will knock and bring imageries, and I'll boil your pot of stars and roast you the moon to be eaten with heavenly honey, the type Aundo himself eating savory. Ever since I saw the tales perfectly carved in your eyes, I ceased to believe in creation fiction, that you were created from a mere bone stolen from my side. From your eyes I learnt the creation of man must have been from woman, because you are yourself a perfection to have flown in his dilemma. Tokwasi. I will battle against gods and leave them beaten in nakedness and make their robes your footmat. For you I will commit sacrileges. Chekanya, eneki hotulonye. Words are coward to describe what you are. So let me become a frog. So when I dip myself in the warm waters of River Benue, my mouth will bubble with songs Islamiyat.
Yo.
I know my senior again.
Thank you very much.
When he says Tokwasi, do you know exactly what he's saying?
I actually want to ask him.
Tokwasi means a queen.
Queen.
Aww.
That's T for queen.
I actually feel like the poem also resonates with you. I mean, your black splendor, and all of that.
Ladies and gentlemen, it seems that the sparks are still flying, after all these years. Okay, maybe it will happen after all. Are you guys planning to publish these poems, or you've done that already? These poems you read a poem, he read a poem.
Yes, I actually want to publish. We gave ourselves a deadline while we were sitting there, like January.
Okay. Do you have a publisher now, or you go look for?
Servag,
I'm a publisher, so she can't be looking for a publisher.
How about you? Are you publishing that as well?
Actually, I have a history with this poem, so I can't publish it.
Okay.
Similar history. The lady I wrote the poem for, she didn't reciprocate my love.
No, but you can't.
So I've decided I'm never going to publish the poem.
You can't read a poem you read to someone else.
No. I think no, I mean, Kemi knows. The emotion with which I read the poem for Kemi is different from the emotion I would use to read this poem for any other person. So, God bless you, deep.
You do. I wrote so write this one. I wrote the.
So I'll write this and dedicate it to Kemi, and I'll publish this.
One.
In fact, I'll have this poem published by next week on a blog, and I'll send her the link.
When we decided to do this, I asked him if they are going to perform. And he said, no, that we'll just do question and answer. And I'm impressed that you guys perform, because that was what I was picturing when I asked that question. But good. So I guess in the absence of any questions and any other issues, we will close this session. Thank you very much.
Okay, so as a form of closing, I don't know if Mr. German is listening to this. I should use the opportunity to say thanks to Cora for all they've been doing for all of us. I mean, it actually means a lot. Just like Kemi said, if not for that slam, she won. If not for coming to Labaf and meeting the personalities we've met, I mean, the likes of Adefila, Shegun Adefila, Edauto, and co. you know, maybe some of us wouldn't probably be where we've been, you know, and of course also coming all the way from Abuja for this festival, all thanks to German. They've not allowed me to be hungry any day, and I've been drinking Lagos water as well, you know. So yeah, I really appreciate it. It always feels like home coming to Labaf. I mean, it's like it makes me feel like I'm not an outsider yet. And of course, after seeing Kemi in a long while, still seeing her beautiful smile today, you know, I mean, it's a thing of great joy. So yeah, thanks to Jaman and Nikolakbo, thanks to Cora, thanks to all of you and the volunteers for accepting me to be among them, you know, in different ways. So yeah, thank you.
Can we also contribute, like, in one way or the other, contribute to Cora by going on YouTube to subscribe on the channel? Because I noticed it's only 26 followers. So we can go on YouTube and subscribe.
Okay, so can we do that already? Since we're even here, please.
Yes, and Instagram too. On Instagram, it is Labaf1. Then on YouTube, it is Cora Labaf.
Okay, so please, we are seeing our hands. We should all bring out our phones and subscribe to.
Just search for Cora Labaf on YouTube.
It hasn't changed. Nobody has. Nothing has changed.
They've not subscribed. We are
not
watching.
subscribe.
We are watching. God's eye.
This is what you should see.
Yes.
Yes.
We are
YouTube.
live. You see it like there.
When you subscribe, press.
You can also tell other people who are interested in art, because most people, they don't know. I will do.
So can we go now?
Yeah,
You want to
it's
do another
many one,
performance?
because no, it's not performance, because I'm a digital person, so I will be disturbing. We can take pictures, post it online, and put Cora 2023, Labaf 2023 with the hashtag. Yes.
Yeah.
You snap a picture, post it on Instagram. People will know that it's actually happening here.
At least I know if I snap with Gemini, I'm going to get a lot of followers.
My storage is full.
I guess we should start.
Thank you very
I guess
much.
we should start.
Yes, yes. You can snap with anybody and post online so that people will know that it's happening here. Let me check my. This thing is full. I'm trying.
It's amazing that Kemi's session has moved from panel to subscription and digital.
Social media manager, exactly. You know how we roll.
All right then. Have a blessed evening and enjoy the rest of your festival. Thank you very much for coming. You've been a beautiful crowd.
confusion came. It's actually the second time that we'll be featuring this book, because we think that the Biafra story is an endless story. As Wale Soyinka said, Biafra is a state of mind. It's not a physical thing that you don't have to struggle for it. It's in the mind of people, so you cannot kill it. But then to do this, we make my job very simple, that the Secretary General of Kora, who wrote the narrative, is actually the moderator of the session. But I have to say that the second author, Iman Iduma, is not around, but we have a video broadcast for him that we take after, and then Uche will have to respond to what he was saying in his story, because it's also a story of Biafra. Well, his own bit of story about the whole Biafra episode. Tonya Kensho, please.
Thank you, German. Thank you for coming. This is a very small crowd. I hope other people are still coming in. Okay. Can we rent a crowd from downstairs, please? Okay. Now, the theme of this festival is reset. The reset. History and a Darkling plane. And that Darkling plane, you all know, was borrowed from Ken Sarowa's On a Darkling plane. And Ken Sarowa's On a Darkling plane is it's also borrowed from, I forget that poet now. Matthew Arnold, which is why Obari Gomba played with both Martin Arnold and Ken Saro-Wiwa yesterday in his keynote address. So basically, what we're saying is that a new administration has come in, and we want to use literature to engage with the histories of the country and provide the context for his doing well if he listens to what we say. So the reset, you know that, a very critical event in the national history of the last 63 years has been the Biafran War. And the elections that we had last February was largely about resolving Biafra. If you look at it, a very vast mass movement of young people came out, pan-Nigerian movement, and, wove themselves around a very, very popular politician from the Southeast and insisted that that was the main man. And, whether you like it or not, that was a real stab at the establishment. Of course, the establishment found all kinds of ways to scuttle the process. But it tells you that the Biafra is not going away. Now, we have had, in some way, a conversation around Biafra with the first session we had yesterday that was more stories about, books about Nigerians who sort of like took over from the British. Akima Bogunje and Peter Enaoro. And it was essentially an excursion into their career trajectories. This afternoon, we had conversations around On a Darkling plane itself, which is Ken Saro-Wiwa's work, which is a long argument against the Biafran War, and Mark Silon's Oil, Politics and Violence, Nigerian Military Coup Culture, 1966 to 1976, which basically explains how what happened. These two books that we are engaging this evening are more personal in nature than those two books that we discussed 4 hours ago. And what we're trying to find out is whether personal stories of loss, how they whether they can unleash the collective empathy of compatriots from all over the nation in ways that textual engagements with the purpose and conduct of the Civil War by generals, politicians, and even novelists in ways that they cannot. How do individual journeys into the familial and communal experiences of a Biafran war help the purpose of a national research? If I tell you my story, and I tell you how shattered my life, my family life was, at the time that you were living very large and interesting lives in Lagos and Ibadan and you know, Jos and Co., would you then begin to empathize with me and say, well, that didn't quite work? Or will you keep on saying that, oh, you people brought it upon yourselves? That's the kind of conversation that I'm hoping that can emerge when we discuss these two books by one, Uche Nwokedi, A Shred of Fear, who writes, I mean, a 60-something-year-old successful Nigerian lawyer, SAN, senior advocate of Nigeria, who thinks back to his life as a 7-year-old, you know, son of a fairly middle-class family in upscale, about whose life is suddenly upturned, you know, by the Biafran War. I mean, I was 7 at the time too, and I was living in Lagos, and I was waiting for my parents to come back from a Owambe party. It was a different experience. Or Emmanuel Iduma's I'm Still With You. Emmanuel is 35, 34. His father actually graduated in Ife in 1983, the same year I graduated. And what he's done here is to use his favorite uncle, the man for whom is named. I mean, how it disappeared. And you know, in Mr. Nwokedi's book, there's also the disappeared ones. And so those are the two books that we're engaging. Emmanuel will tell us a story through a video that we will show snippets of that video as I have a conversation with Mr. Nwokedi. So without further ado, let me invite Mr. Uche Nwokedi to the high table. Thank you very much. Anyway, you are the star of so I'm just, so you are going to take charge, you know. I mean, you just, because, you know, this is 67 to 2003. This is 56 years after the war, and you wrote this book essentially over the last 2 years, which means that you wrote about something that happened, you know, 50-something years ago. What was the trigger, and what were you trying to achieve? And, you know, you can then take off on tangents, and then I can bring you back to other, you know, whatever, you know. But essentially, it's the story of that, you know, sharpness. What happened, you know?
Well, thank you very much. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. The trigger is always the question. What is it that sets you off on a journey of writing? I think that the best way that I can explain it was this book started out as an essay. Ndebe and a couple of other people were doing a collection of essays on recollections of people who were children in Biafra between the ages of 6 and 19. So I offered a chapter. I think we're all required to offer a chapter each. And after about 2 years, it wasn't published. So I spoke to Oke and I said, well, if you guys are not going to be doing anything with it, do you mind if I take it back and work on it. So I retrieved my chapter, and speaking to my friend Bankole Olayebi, I was able to flesh it out into a book. So I think that the trigger was my contribution to say Oke's work initially. I would say that's a trigger. But then it's interesting because some of these memories stay with you forever. If we talk about our childhood, there's no way I can talk about my childhood and not talk about the war. It's an essential part of my upbringing, my growing up, and an essential part of my past. And so that is always there. Whatever you do is always there in the background.
Let's quickly travel to now. Do you think that personal tellings, and I know that there's been quite a number of personal tellings, but a whole lot of, a bulk of the Biafran literature is essentially by actual participants in the process of the structure of Biafra.
Yeah.
Do you think that personal tellings like yours can invoke more empathy from, those of us who are not necessarily than what I see as some kind of cynical responses now? I know that that is not the way this discussion ought to go. We will come back to,
Okay.
but let's just get that out of us.
I think that every country has watershed moments in their history. For Nigeria, it's the Biafra War. I think it's something that as a country we need to look at, review, and get past it. Now, when you have something like that, like we grew up reading comics on the Second World War. We grew up watching TV series, and even till today, there are still movies about the Second World War. When you have such a large, momentous event in the history of a people or the history of a country, it becomes a source material for many different stories. Whether it's an account of the combatants, whether it's an account of the politicians, or people who were just there. They all add to the multidimensional aspects of the story. And it lends, in my opinion, it lends to a better understanding of what transpired.
So you think there's been a sufficient debate, that we've had a sufficient debate on the, shall I say, consequences of the war?
I don't think we've had any.
That's one question. The second thing,
Yeah.
so that we can now go back to
Yeah,
your story.
okay.
And the second thing is that would this have been a better place, this place called Nigeria, if there had not been the Biafran? They would say the way that people respond to if there had not been a coup, would this have actually been a better place? Or just as African countries elsewhere poorly governed, we would still have been poorly governed anyway.
Yeah.
What's your take? Is that what?
Well, I don't think.
So that's first.
Yeah,
question.
the first question is whether there's been sufficient debate. I don't think there's been enough debates. I don't think we've interrogated the issues that led to the war, nor have we interrogated our coexistence as a nation sufficiently. So in terms of, has there been sufficient debate? No, I don't think so. I don't think so. Would Nigeria have been a better place if there was no war? I don't know. Okay. We seemed from independence to move sharply to war. So it was almost as if it was a path that independence placed us on. But I don't know. It may have been, it may not have been. But the thing now is that we're here, and this is where we are, and we need to address it.
Okay, so Uche, let's start now.
Okay, let's start.
Butterflies, pretty school.
Yes.
I mean, wonderful children, everybody having fun, and then it happened. Tell us the story.
You want me to tell you the story or to read it?
No. Okay, you want to read something?
No, I don't know.
No, reading. This is, actually a book festival, so reading will be better.
Okay, I'll just
I
read
I
it.
have some favorites of, of mine, but you are the author.
I'll read parts and I'll speak through some parts. In the prologue, the prologue sort of sets the tone for the book and for the story. And I'll just read a portion of it. We must always remember where we have been so we can adequately and safely navigate our current journey. It is fascinating to discover how much lies buried deep inside the mind of the child. Just one recalled event is an awakening that opens a door, and through that door, connected events, incidents emerge. The more you remember, the stronger your memories become. Soon you find that the skein of events from the past is floating back to you with the attendant emotional consequences of such powerful recall. A shred of fear is an exploration of the past, of the thread that connects me to Biafran War. It recalls my journey through that war, drawing on my childhood memories. I was one of the lucky ones who, by the grace of God, came through to the other side. These snapshots from 3 years of my childhood are set down exactly as I remember them, all provoking the same question: where are we now? I take full responsibility for everything I write here, but as I've recorded what I remember, this book provides only a personal view of the Biafran War. I do this primarily for the next generation, especially my children, Chuba, Olisa, and Adiba. I hope this gives them a sense of what it was like for me to live through the war. I treasure these memories and hold fast to them as they are the watershed years of my journey in life so far. I fully embrace the emotions they evoke with no apologies for what the child remembers. So that's taken from the prologue. And basically, like I said, it's a very personal account. What I've found from people that have read the book is that it's a shared experience if you were living in Biafra. It's not unique to me. My friend that was here recounted his experiences and was very close to mine. I think that the only thing was that they ran from Lagos to Port Harcourt and then to different towns in the east when the war broke out. But it was the same thing. Same background, similar upbringing, same experiences. Losing family in the pogroms. So anytime I encounter this, I realize that I might be telling a personal story, but it's not just my story. It's the story of many people who were there. So it's a shared experience. And that lends power to the truth of the story in the sense that if we're all seeing it this way, or if we all experienced it this way, then my experiences were not unique to me. It wasn't like I was singled out for individual persecution. It was a collective.
So, what was the sharpest early recollection? I know that you started in the school.
Yes.
Is that part that you want to read, or do
I
you
can
want
read
to
that
read
part.
where the uncle comes back and tells your mom this particular story about?
Well, perhaps I should read the way that the war was introduced to us. Let me put it that way. My introduction to the Biafran War did not come from my parents' explanations about the creation of Biafra or about the meanings of pogroms and secession. Those were only words to me, two of the many the war eventually taught me, expanding my lexicon greatly. Even the announcements on the radio or lessons in school did not prepare me for the war, not even when Yakubu Gowon declared war on Biafra, and I asked what this meant. I was introduced to the Biafran War quite dramatically and unexpectedly. It was late in 1967 in Santa Maria, Aba. I was all of 7 years old, yet that day I sensed something had changed in our lives forever. It was a school day, and while I cannot recall what we were doing in class or what lessons we had that day, I do remember it was one of those lively classes where we were all chattering away. I was waiting for the lunchtime bell so I could indulge in my favorite break pastime of chasing and catching the butterflies and grasshoppers in the fields with my friend Oluchukwu. Santa Maria was a private Catholic primary school on Constitution Crescent in Aba, run by Irish nuns. The school was immaculately laid out with open grounds, lush lawns and trees dotted around the compound. In a corner behind the main buildings, swings and seesaws created a play area for the younger children. There was one tree in particular that was quite common in Aba and could be found all around the school premises. Its strong branches were not so high and seemed to be made for excellent climbing and hanging upside down. I remember it as the flame of the forest, or so it was called, perhaps because of its red flowers. Santa Maria's main building was long, with an endless row of arches and columns that gave it the distinctive look of a church or convent. I'll skip all these parts. There were so many beautiful butterflies and grasshoppers all over the fields, inviting you to come out and play. And so I did. We all did. We happily accepted their invitation and chased them anytime we had the slightest chance. It seemed a waste not to try and catch some of them. And sometimes when the teacher was not watching, we fed grasshoppers to the fishes in the aquarium that stood on a high stool in the corner at the back of the classroom. On one occasion, Oluchukwu and I had run so far away from the main school building, chasing butterflies and catching grasshoppers, that we did not hear the bell indicating the end of break time. We were late getting back to class again. The rest of the day was spent standing on the veranda outside the office of the principal, the Reverend Sister Jacinta. By the standard of the nuns at Santa Maria, that was a severe punishment. Everyone who walked past us and saw us, especially the nuns and teachers, smiled sympathetically as if we were sinners saying amial coppers. When my mother, or Mama, as we called her at home, came to pick me after school, found me standing there with Oluchukwu. Mama was a slim dark woman with a quiet but firm manner. She was also always immaculately dressed. She too was a teacher at the Golf Course Primary School on the other side of Aba. She had attended convent schools in Jos and believed implicitly in the infallibility of teachers, especially if they were nuns. I knew there was no story I could muster in my defense. I could read her mind. Of all the children in the school, it is my son that is standing in front of the principal's office. She politely apologized to Sister Jacinta, then took us both home and gave us the standard punishment in most homes. She caned us. After that, she sent us over to Oluchukwu's mom with a note for us to deliver. Oluchukwu's mom read it and caned us some more because she felt Mama was too soft on us and might not have given us enough strokes. In those days, disciplining was communal and freely shared between parents without fear or favor. Oluchukwu's mother then pulled both her ears to make sure they were real and not for decoration. That was a common thing for mothers of their generation, and Mama often did it. At times, she would conk us, rapping us sharply on the head with her knuckles as if to drill the object of the punishment too. We blamed each other for not paying attention and listening for the bell, and told ourselves we would avoid being caught the next time. On one of those days when we were talking and raising our hands in class to catch the teacher's attention, a haunting wail followed by a loud grating noise pierced our happy chatter. Startled and confused, we all, including our teacher, stopped what we were doing to listen. It sounded as if hundreds of angry bats were flying through the classroom with venomous malice bent on destruction. The noise was then accentuated by distant sonic booms from different directions. The classroom shook and the windows rattled violently. It felt as if the roof would fly off. We covered our ears and instinctively crouched on the floor. There must have been 2 or 3 loud booms before they faded into the distance. It was disorientating, as if the skies were caving in on us. We remembered our drills. We tumbled out of our classrooms and raced towards the freshly dug trenches at the end of the fields, where we had been instructed to go if there was ever an air raid or something that seemed like an air raid. All of us in our pristine uniforms of white shirts and red shorts for the boys, and red skirts or dresses for the girls, made for the trenches and jumped in. We were like a fast-flowing stream of water disappearing down a drain after a heavy rainfall. Yeah, so that was my first encounter with the war. The air raid, the first air raid in Aba.
But it says, you already have some drill which means that this has been happening even before then. I mean, there have been some kind of, otherwise how would there have been some drill? But we should, okay.
Well, we have been told that there was a war. Okay. We have been told that there could be air raids. We have been drilled after they dug the trenches that if there was any commotion or air raid, make for the trenches. But you see, nothing quite prepares you like the real thing. So those were things that, but as kids, when you're telling these things, you don't even take it seriously. You're thinking of maybe Vic Morrow's combat on TV or something like that. But when the real thing happened, when that air raid happened in Aba, it shook everybody up. Everybody. Because nobody, young or old, nobody had ever experienced an air raid. So that's it.
Okay, we need to be very careful that we don't do chapter by chapter. So what I like that you do is more epochal events, in this. And I'm also going to do something. I'm going to be juxtaposing some of your experiences with this gentleman who writes a book looking for his uncle. I mean, which, like the kind innate character in Half of a Yellow Sun. I mean, one of those people who disappears, in the war. So, can we have some, the next very epochal story? Do you?
I'll tell you. I'll tell you a funny one that became a family joke. And it had to do with my younger brother, who we couldn't find him in school. My mom came to school. One of my sisters also came to look for us. We looked all over the place for my younger brother. We couldn't find him. And then somebody said that perhaps a teacher had taken him home. But when we got home, we found him crying. And the story was that our driver got to the school before my mom, because they abandoned, when the air raid started, they were coming from town. So they left the car there, and I think my mom gave him instructions to go home, that she would come to school and get us. He somehow got to the school before her, saw my brother wandering around the gates crying. So he took him instead, carried him home. Now, Anekwe found him near the school gates, wandering around in tears, unheeded and unattended to. Page 10. Grabbing him by the hand, Anekwe said he picked him up and ran home with him. Ifeanyi, that's my brother, was still crying when we got home. His own story was a little different. According to him, Anekwe was carrying him home, piggyback style, but had dropped him mid-journey and ran off when he heard gunshots. Ifeanyi said he had to run after Anekwe, shouting, "Anekwe chalumo, Anekwe chalumo, Anekwe wait for me." Anekwe on his own part claimed he carried Ifeanyi all the way home. We never knew what actually transpired, but it became a family joke. Whenever we saw Anekwe, we would chant in unison, "Anekwe chalumo." So those are one of the, should I say, the light-hearted moments in our lives during the war.
So you soon left for Aba. You soon left Aba, and then you went elsewhere.
Yes.
And moved
We were in Aba until Aba fell in 1968. In the course of that period, I lost 3 of my cousins in one air raid. They lived in GRA, we lived in town. And normally, what would happen, because of the air raids, during the day, my father had an uncompleted building in the GRA. And we knew that the GRA was hardly ever bombed. So during the day, we spent the daytime in that uncompleted building in the GRA. And it soon became a center of activity for Boy Scouts. So I was in the Boy Scouts. My mother was a Girl Guide commissioner. So they arranged for kids to be having scout meetings and brownie meetings there because schools had closed down. So these my cousins, the only ways, they lived opposite that place. And they were close in age to my older sister. So they became very close. We'd spend some time in their house during the day. They would join us in the activities there. But on this day, they came into town, and down a road across, there's a part of the road called Pound Road Extension. On Pound Road Extension was where you had most of the bookshops, record shops, and things. And they had been sent into town by their father to buy books from the bookshop because he felt that they were just sitting around the house playing. They were in the bookshop when that bookshop was bombed. And all 3 of them died. So it was very, how do I put it? It was very destabilizing for all of the families in Aba. It was a small community. In fact, of the 3 kids, the corpses of 2 of them were found. The 3rd was never found. So it became traumatic, not just for the family, but for my mother and the other women who would go around hospitals, mortuaries, common graves looking for them. I think that was a turning point for us during the war. It became clear that, this thing is not a joke anymore. It's not just there, it's anybody can die. The interesting thing was that I saw their mother in 2017 or so. As recently as that. I hadn't seen her in over 30 or 40 years. And I saw her, I met her at a family friend's house who happened to be her cousin, Chifathon Banefo. And she was there with her daughter who, were talking. So Chief comes out and says, "Do you know who you're talking to?" And I said, "Yes, because it's my cousin." So she turns to me and says, "Sorry, who are you?" And I introduced myself. So she said, "Oh," I said, "I'm PK and Martha's son." So she said, "Oh, how's Martha, my dear friend?" And I said, Martha passed on some years ago. You know, the woman became a different person. Her mind went back to the day her children died. She started talking about, she couldn't talk about anything else. She said, you know, that day I was doing my laundry. I didn't know that, they said they bombed the town. I didn't know my children were there. You know, and she went on. And after a while, Chief had to he actually asked me to leave. But I said, you know what, you brought memories back. So I was actually having a meeting with him. So he said, go, I'll call you later and we can continue our meeting. But you see, after I had that encounter with her, for the next 2 or 3 days, I wasn't myself. I was thinking, could I have, well, I know I triggered something, but could I have survived losing 3 of my children in one day and remained sane? There was a bit of guilt that did we abandon this woman after the war and move on? So I called my sisters and I said to them, I just ran into Auntie C. We used to call her Auntie C. So my older sister lives in Abuja. She said when she lived in Lagos, she lived near the woman. But after a while, she started avoiding her because anytime she ran into her, the woman remembered her daughter that died. So when she sees the woman coming, she would avoid her. So those are some of the things that war does. You know, for like 3 days, I wasn't myself because I felt a lot of guilt that, you know what, we just moved on and we left this woman on her own to bear her losses. You know, so I think those are the aspects of the war that people don't talk about or don't even think about. Those are the, call it trauma, call it psychological effects of living through a war. You know, people tend to glorify war. It's not, you can't glorify war, however you look at it, for whatever reason. You know, no country goes to war and comes back the same. We've seen that throughout history. Vietnam, we know what Vietnam did to America. No country goes to war and comes back the same. So.
Thank you, Uche. Because you got into this point, let me introduce Emmanuel Iduma, who is searching for his uncle. Can we put that video on, please, just to have a 5 to 7 minute sketch, and you will respond to that and continue to with your.
About his latest book, a memoir about the aftermath of the Nigerian Civil War. By way of introduction, Emmanuel Iduma trained as a lawyer at Obafemi Awolowo University before getting his MFA in art criticism and writing from the School of Visual Arts in New York. Emmanuel is also the author of A Stranger's Pose, which was published in 2018. And was longlisted for the Ondaatje Prize. In 2022, Emmanuel was awarded the Wyndham Campbell Prize in the non-fiction category. His writing can be found in several publications, including Granta and the New York Review of Books. Good afternoon, Emmanuel.
Thank you.
So, to begin with, I'm aware that you had been thinking about the Nigerian Civil War for a few years. And the first question is, why did you choose this form? I know that you approached it from different formats in times past. If you want to go into that, why nonfiction?
Thank you very much, Aribami. It's an honor to be part of the Lagos Book and Arts Festival, even if remotely. And I want to express my gratitude to Mr. Tony Akinyosho, Mr. German, and Nikolapo, and the entire Labaf team for the invitation and affording us this opportunity. So I'm Still With You came out in the first place, as you said, out of an attempt to respond in some way to the Nigerian Civil War. I had been interested in the war, you know, as a historical event, of course, and also because, you know, I knew that my family had a tragedy really that was connected to the war, which was essentially the disappearance of my uncle after the war ended. And in the past, you know, before I wrote this book, I was thinking, you know, I'm going to write a novel from the perspective of a young man who is trying to locate what happened to his father, who was a pro-Biafran agitator. And I had sort of gone to some degree, I started writing that particular novel, and at some point it just occurred to me that really what I was trying to do was to use fiction as a frame to explore a family story, which is the disappearance of my uncle. And so it seemed almost a no-brainer at that point when I had that realization to sort of just shift to nonfiction and talk to my family, members of my family, and do some traveling within the Southeast as a way to gather material for this book. So nonfiction, I would say, was the choice because it did feel to some degree as inevitable. It felt that this was a story that could only be written as fact and not based on imagination or an imagined character or sequence of events.
So you mentioned the fact that, you know, when you began to work on this, part of what you did was travel across the Southeast. And I mean, the book that you published before this, travel is at the heart of that.
Mm-hmm.
Did you immediately, when you decided to write nonfiction, think that traveling in the Southeast would be an integral part of this book? Because, you know, there are all kinds of ways you could have approached it.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. I think that travel was an essential component of this book, or an element in the book, even in the eventual book that I wrote. And that was really because when I published A Stranger's Pose, I feel like I accidentally stumbled onto travel as a form. I hadn't thought that, you know, I hadn't intended to be a travel writer, let's put it that way. But travel was the form in which I had, in a sense, began to work with, right? Given the experience that I had traveling around the continent. And my prompt to myself, or the exercise that I took on, was to then, in a sense, take all the lessons I had learned from doing more, you know, extensive reading in the travel writing genre, the experiences I'd had while traveling in terms of writing A Stranger's Pose, and then incorporate it into a more well-behaved travelogue, you know, something that felt a little bit more linear than I had attempted in A Stranger's Pose. So from the start, as I said, the character that I had been imagining, the novel that I was working on, was someone who was, I sort of characterized him as someone my age, so in his, you know, his late 20s, early 30s at the time. And he was then traveling across the southeastern part of Nigeria in the novel to discover what happened to his father. And so I just sort of took that same prompt to say, what if I was the one traveling rather than imagining someone traveling? And so travel was very integral. And I think in conclusion on this point, why is travel important for a book of this sort, right? Non-fiction is a genre, or, you know, that the elements or the components or the constituent parts are usually gotten from some kind of facts, right? You know, and typically the question for, I think, a non-fiction writer is, how do I get my facts? So if one was writing a reported piece of journalism, you know, you get your fact from interviews and doing some on-ground reporting. If one was writing a memoir, you know, you get your facts from talking to members of your family, or traveling. You know, And so it was very clear, important to me that I put myself in the place that the story was set, or the story was going to be set, which is the southeastern part of Nigeria. My family was there. My extended and some members of my nuclear family were in the southeast. No, not the nuclear family. I mean some of my extended family. But I didn't live in the southeast at the time, so I was really returning to the place that my family was from, and being in that place and trying to report on on that experience of travel in relation to the Nigerian Civil War.
I mean, I think the travel component is so essential and enriches the book in that
I think we should stop
you
that.
have all this research that you've done.
We can stop that now,
details.
so that I thought it was going to go directly into the story, and it seemed to be. We'll get back to Iduma. So, of course, you don't have to travel. I mean, you had seen everything. You had done all the traveling. So tell us about those movements and how, I mean, those are gruesome. You had to live from this place to that place to that. But the way you render these things in your book, I mean, I had the sense, I'm sorry, I'm far removed from these challenges, but it didn't come across to me as that you were very poor tenants in these places. You didn't live badly at all, really. I'm sorry if I sound like,
No, it's a fact. I mean, my father was a fairly successful lawyer. So we had a fairly middle class upbringing. During the war, he was made an administrator of one of the provinces in Biafra. So he was a provincial administrator for Oka province, and he was also a colonel in the army. So he was quite well placed in government. So somehow that helped. But in terms of being refugees, we're refugees. Because when we left Aba, we had nowhere to run to, as it were. So we first went to Oga, to my mother's older sister's place. And from there we moved to Umuchu, where we eventually settled down. But we lived the life of refugees. We depended on relief food from either the Catholic mission or from my father. Do you get my point? So it wasn't as bad for us as it may have been for other people, but we too went through some privations.
Okay, so let's go back to some of the things that were very difficult that the federal troops did. I mean, that led to quite a number of these issues that, made families miss families. Do you want to read? Okay, I mean, you have some parts that you want. Yeah, I'm thinking of, that particular uncle of yours who was, your mom's favorite guy,
Tony.
and who told the story of how he escaped from Jaws.
Okay.
Yeah. If you want to read that part, it's if for that particular passage for me is enough. I mean, if that's all you wrote, that's enough price for the book.
All right. I talked about almost every family in Aba having returnees, refugees, members of their family who lived in other parts of the country running back to Aba. Then I said our turn, 24. Yeah. Our turn to Aba, very own refugee, came when Uncle Joseph ran back from Jos. His return caused quite a stir, a mixture of happiness, jubilation, and anger. He had been missing for some time, and nobody was sure if he survived the pogroms or if he had died trying to make his way back from Jos. There had been no news from any of the Jos people Mama had contacted. She had cried a lot, blaming him for being so stubborn and for not returning home when all Igbo were advised to go back to the east. She also blamed herself for not traveling there to drag him back. And then she blamed her older sister, Auntie Anna, for not being firm with Joseph. Mama and Joseph were quite close, and she always worried about him. Uncle Joseph, or brother as we sometimes called him, was a very reticent man. He had attended St. John's College, Kaduna, before returning to his parents' home in Jos, getting a job at Radio Nigeria and settling down. He had the North flowing in his veins, as Mama often said. He spoke fluent Hausa, as the whole family did, and read and wrote some Arabic. His return was a miracle. For the first few days, we received visitors, mostly family friends, who had come to see Uncle Joe. He sat with them and fielded their questions, but never really said much until one quiet evening when it was just us in the house, and he began to relate his ordeal to my mother. Under normal circumstances, children did not hang around when adults were talking. We would get up and quietly leave the room on cue. Stories of the war, however, and other such experiences were an exception. It was everybody's duty to listen and learn, children and adults alike. Perhaps our parents also let us stay because they wanted us to know what to do if we ever had to run. Once Uncle Joseph began, we sat quietly on the floor and listened with rapt attention. The night the pogrom started in Jos, Uncle Joe had worked the late shift at the radio station on Saturday evening, getting home very early on Sunday morning. Ordinarily, he would have taken a bath and slept in and maybe gone to Mass in the evening. For some reason, he decided to attend the first Mass at 6:30 a.m. instead. He was running late and had to hurry. As he turned to leave the house, he noticed a food stain on his shirt from his meal the previous night. He was too tired to change his shirt, so he wore a dashiki over it to conceal the stain. Finally, he put on his Hausa cap, as he always did, and left for Mass. The Mass was quite brief, he said. It had to be. By the time he got to the church, news had reached the congregation that the pogroms had begun in Jos and that the main casualties were the Igbo. The congregation was nervous and fearful. The priest spoke to them about the killings, prayed for them all, and then quickly and quietly dispersed. On his way home, Uncle Joseph encountered rioters and looters, ransacking house after house, looking for the Igbo. He walked back from Mass through the melee, unnoticed and undisturbed. When Uncle Joe got home, he found his house had been broken into and ransacked. He recognized some of the looters from his neighborhood. They greeted him and spoke to him in Hausa, telling him that the Igbo man who lived in the house had a lot of property. It dawned on him that these same people he exchanged greetings with every day as he went to and from work did not know he was Igbo. They carried on their conversation in Hausa. Uncle Joe, all the while fearing for his life and praying under his breath. He pretended not to see his furniture being carted away as some of the looters raided his kitchen for food. As the free-for-all rumpus went on, he made his way to his bedroom and pretended to be rifling through the things there. He calmly took his camera, passports, a fresh shirt, and some money, which he kept at home for emergencies. Exclaiming and cursing in Hausa, he ransacked and looted his own bedroom. When he had secured these things, he left, saying to the other looters that he was moving to the next house. Back on the street, Uncle Joe headed to the Sudan interior missionary center where he had some friends and where he felt he would be safe. As he described what he had seen to my mother, his eyes welled up and his head shook from side to side as if he was trying to erase the memories. The graphic details were lost on us children because by this time he was speaking in Hausa, as my mother and her siblings always did when they wanted to speak privately. We could only imagine how bad his experiences must have been, from his facial expressions and gesticulations and the way he ruefully shook his head. Uncle Joe and two other young Igbo men had been at the Sudan mission for 2 or 3 days when the missionaries informed them that it was no longer safe for them to stay there. Word had gone round that they were harboring the Igbo and a lynch mob was heading that way. The 3 men weighed their options. Should they wait the pogrom out, or should they leave the north? They all voted to leave, but how? Uncle Joseph suggested they should try to get to the airport and see if they could catch one of the evacuation flights to Enugu. The other men rejected this without hesitation. They had heard that some flights bound for Enugu had been diverted to Kaduna or Kano, where the passengers had been made to disembark and then killed. The other men insisted they would take their chance. They would not take this chance and would instead try their luck by road. Uncle Joe told them a road journey was too long and fraught with danger. There were rumors that the Igbo had been attacked and killed in car parks, on the road, and at railway stations. They argued for a short while, but since they could not agree on the safest route back to the east, they elected to travel back separately. They prayed together, embraced and parted. The other men headed off to make their way by road, while Uncle Joe went to the Jos airport. After hiding in the bushes nearby for a day or so to see what was going on, he finally plucked up courage and made his way into the airport. After some commotion and arguments, he succeeded in boarding a flight set to be bound for Enugu. It was the longest journey he had ever made in his life, he said. Everyone was quiet. The tension that enveloped the passengers was so suffocating that the only sound was their constant gasps. When the plane eventually landed and the doors opened, everyone was too scared to move. Then they heard Igbo being spoken outside. They listened some more to confirm that it really was Igbo. After a while, some people came on board and told them they had arrived in Enugu. It was only then that they heaved a sigh of relief and began to disembark.
Wow. There are stories like that all over the place. I noticed in the book that you didn't actually live about until, okay, well, in your own telling, this is a close to 200-page book, and by page 90, you guys were still in Aba. So you really wanted to dwell on Aba before you started talking about the movement. But the reason why I keep asking about movements is I wanted to get a sense of, in terms of relative comfort, in terms of relative discomfort, in terms of, because I know that there were 1 or 2 places where you felt worse, and there are some places where you felt more comfortable. That's the senior brother. They're brothers.
Well,
yeah.
I don't think, speaking as a child, I don't think I had an option of when to leave Aba. And I think that there was an element of hope. You must remember that there was a lot of propaganda in the war. So at times you might not get a clear picture of how well you're doing or how well your army is doing. And what was keeping Aba going was that Port Harcourt had not yet fallen. And as long as Port Harcourt was still safe, as it were, Aba remained safe. I think the fear about Aba falling came after Port Harcourt fell. And you must remember that there's just 40 miles between Aba and Port Harcourt. So once Port Harcourt fell, people started getting nervous that, okay, if Port Harcourt has fallen, the next big town is Aba. So as long as we were safe in my grandfather, who was the traditional ruler in my hometown.
Just a second. And, you know, at this point in time, we can open the floor. I mean, so you can butt in. But let him read that part. Trust me, you'll be glad he did.
Okay. My grandfather basically called for the entire family to come home. I think it was more like a census of the family. Let's know who's with us. Let's know who's still alive. And let's see what the future holds for us. So the entire family, you know, my grandfather had about 10, 12 wives and many children. So the entire family, and I had this great big house. The entire family that survived the war, fortunately we didn't lose many people, came back. So my father, his brothers, they were all there. And every evening, that's, now looking back, then, you know, it didn't mean much to us. But every evening, they would sit around, drink palm wine, and talk. It was an evening ritual for them. So looking back with hindsight, I realized that they were repairing and rejuvenating their spirits. Now think about this. They had been through a war and they lost. So the next question for them is, what does the future hold for us? How do we come back into Nigeria? And what will happen to us and our families? So that bonding that they were having, because that's what it was. I mean, they would be gisting, they'd be laughing, they'd be making fun of each other, but they were bonding. And they were making plans. You know, they were discussing, okay, because they had lived all over Nigeria before the war. Some lived in Lagos, some lived in the north, some lived in Port Harcourt, some lived in the east. So all the brothers would be there, and every evening, you know, they'll be gisting. So that in itself, when I thought back about it, that's when I got to meet a lot of my cousins. That's when I got to understand how the family was structured. Because before the war, we didn't really mix, we didn't know. And with my grandfather there, was a strong man. You know, he took charge. In fact, there's a story that when the federal troops entered my hometown, everybody took off. But he stayed in his palace. And then they asked him, because I mean, they knew about the activities of my father. So they said, okay, you're picking one at this one. Okay, tell us, sir, are you a Nigerian or a Biafran? They asked him, the soldiers asked him. So he called some of his children, the boys that stayed with him. Some of them could speak Hausa, some of them could speak Yoruba. So he said to the ones that lived in the north and spoke Hausa, say, please talk to this young Hausa officer. They spoke Hausa to the soldiers. He turned to the ones that spoke Yoruba. They spoke Yoruba to some of the other soldiers. So he then turned around and asked the Hausa major, tell me, young man, do you think I'm a Nigerian or a Biafran? Yeah? The man couldn't answer. They left him. Because in some places they could have burnt his house if they wanted. But they left him and they moved on. So he didn't leave his place. You know? So those are the kind of experiences.
You know, there are people who were killed for doing that.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Yeah. So, do you still want me to read?
I think that you've explained it enough. I think that Tade has read your book and is that you want to venture an opinion? Okay. Maybe we'll still read that.
So thank you for coming to share this book with us. You know, I never knew this until today, that the book began as an essay. I thought it began as a memoir. And this is significant because in the aftermath of the Second World War, a very slim genre of war literature came out. And most of those began as essays because the question of the nature of evil and what it does to people became prominent because people didn't want to see this again in their lifetime, and if possible, in the lifetimes of their children. But thank you for sharing that with us. The question I want to ask is, I've seen you in court as a lawyer, and those who have not seen you in court will not understand this, but there's a difference between intellectual truth and emotional truth. And thank you for writing this book because it gives us access to the emotional truth of life from the point of view of innocence. So thank you for writing. But the question really I want to ask is, you could have relocated abroad after this experience going through the war as you did as an adult, but you didn't. You chose to stay. Was it the spirit of your grandfather that was informing?
That's a very interesting question. Let me go back a bit. There was a time during the war that they allowed mixed race children or children from non-Nigerian mothers, I think under the age of 16 or so, to leave Biafra. A lot of people, even though they were true-blooded and full-blooded Igbos, left through Gabon. I have a friend who, because he spoke French, got into Gabon and was helping with the refugee children. At some point, my father was a socialist with Otegbeye and all of them. They had the socialist workers, so he had links in Russia. At some point, it was mooted that perhaps my brother and I should go to Russia. My mother said no. We stay here. Now, when the war ended, the thought of leaving just did not cross my parents' mind. Maybe if they had left, we would have gone with them. And really didn't cross our minds that, okay, we have to leave Nigeria. I think the way it was that whatever it was, would face it and would face it together. And that's why a lot of people remained. And I think there was still belief at that time that things could still be worked out and people will be okay. You know, so question of leaving the country never crossed my mind. I'm still here. I'm still here.
I need to, now that you brought that up, really, it didn't occur to me when I went to Baptist Academy at the age of 12 in 1972 that the people, that all the, small boys don't know these things. The people who came back from Biafra, we didn't know anything. This is this book that made me start to reflect. Oh, so Israel Peter side probably came back. Collins Akwapuna, probably came back. I didn't, that sort of thing. So even the country itself, if I consider the kind of things that certain people were saying, immediately after the election, after that February election, I'm wondering how come that when we actually fought a war, it wasn't like that. I was very surprised. Genuinely close friends who were speaking like what they were speaking, because of a certain candidate who seemed to was upsetting the apple cart. So this is very interesting that you say this.
Yeah.
I'm sorry for hogging the microphone so much, which is why this country and most African countries actually need this kind of books, because there's something that adults do which inevitably ends up poisoning the well, but which the perspective of a child saves the narrative from. And the way I like to, I want to commend you for making the effort to sit down and write this book, because it is not easy. I cannot imagine that it was easy. The thing about these kinds of books is that it tells us the meta-narrative. I met an old man once in a village in Italy called Bellagio, and he was the one that let me know that there was actually an experiment conducted by the Americans in the wake of the Second World War in what is now Holland. They found out that the epigenetics of a whole nation was affected by even people who said they were neutral during the conflict. There were children born hungrier than children would normally be born. Wow. Putin, many people don't know, he has a very interesting story of origin. There are two stories, but if you know the other story, you know that it could not be but a Putin as we know it. But I say again that these kinds of books are important. I wish more people would, muster the courage to write this so that we can articulate, regardless of whoever is stoking this question. By the way, my cousins, the Moors, grew up in Onitsha. The mother was from my side. The father was a big businessman during the war. But they chose, even though they were half Yoruba, half Igbo, to stay in. They only came out in 1980 to come and join us. But well, I wish they too would write their book.
My uncle, who passed away a few years ago, he was a traditional ruler in my town. Alex, Lagos boy. Went to Greg's, married a Yoruba lady, Shakbara Williams, from Ajele. When the war broke out, Alex left Lagos, came back to the east. A year later, Auntie Kofo came to Biafra. And she lived in Biafra throughout the war. In fact, their first child, Adeze, was born in Ekulobia. Nobody bothered her. Nobody disturbed her. She lived there peacefully until the war ended. So in many ways, it was a crazy war. And there were many Yoruba people living in the east during the war. There are many people that will tell you, oh, my mother is Yoruba, she was in Biafra. So in many ways, it was a crazy war. It was in many different ways. It's not a war that one can easily make sense of. Yeah.
Okay, all right. Let me join those that have been appreciating you for coming up with this story. I think it's best told from a point of innocence. We've read so many books about the Civil War. People are talking from their own perspectives and trying to make heroes of themselves, but certainly not this one. My question is, given what you've gone through, where Nigeria has traversed over the years, and where we are right now, IPOB, restructuring, and all the things that are within our governance scape. Given what you've seen, and I did my youth service in Enugu, and I truly enjoyed it. As a matter of fact, I was at Enugu, I made sure that I told myself I won't marry a Yoruba lady. And I ended up marrying an Akwa Ibom lady, even though she doesn't like, for me to say that I married her because of soup. But I enjoyed my stay in Enugu, and we could travel on Friday, come to Lagos, then we go back, by Monday morning. Then I was working with the late Ken Saro-Wiwa. But the point for me is, how do you think we can resolve all of this? Are we likely to get back to, in quote, the one Nigeria? Because right now, we are just at crossroads. We're at the crossroads, and the slightest thing, just like he said, everybody's claiming this. I didn't know the difference. I didn't know the difference. But today, my kids are growing up and knowing that okay, there is Igbo, there is Hausa, there is Yoruba. I went to a federal government college, and we didn't know the difference. So, given your experience, given what you've gone through, maybe you don't have the answer, but what would you love to see, as we grow as a nation?
It's a tough question. When we look at sports, Super Eagles, we don't care where the players are from. If Okocha is messing up, everybody abuses him. Nobody's looking at his ethnicity. If Garba Lawal messes up, the same amount of abuse. That is the kind of Nigeria I'd like to see. And I think we missed something during the last election. My old boys' WhatsApp platform became so bitter, toxic. I was surprised. These are people that we've been friends for the last, 50 years. We grew up together. You know what I mean? At some point, I had to post, and I said, listen, yes, we all came from different parts of the country. But the minute we entered through the gates of St. Gregory's College, we became brothers. Let us stay within that mood. It was very disappointing because I always say that the last elections created a new tribe, a non-ethnic tribe of Nigerians. And most of them were young people looking for an answer. Now, if you look at intermarriages going on now, it'll be difficult for, I don't see how people can make that ethnic argument. When the issue of the Labour candidate for Lagos came up, I said to one of my friends, I said, but you realize that your wife is not Yoruba, which means that in future, you might be precluding your own children from from participating in Lagos politics. Because they'll say to them, but your mother is not Yoruba. Your mother is not one of us. I said, so why would you push and foster that kind of argument? Why don't we look for the best people that can get the job done? That's what we need to address in Nigeria. It's not an ethnic, listen, if, as we've seen it, the issue of governance is not an ethnic issue. IPOB, yes, they have their issues, but it's not an ethnic issue. It's not, it's a question of, let's get it right. You can't be a rich man in a poor neighborhood. You are poor. In some neighborhoods, you can't run your generator beyond midnight. The boys will come and knock on your door. That's poverty. It doesn't matter how many generators you have. And those are the kind of things that we need to be looking at. How do we get Nigeria to a point where it doesn't matter where you come from, you're assured of a good life and a safe life? That's where we are. I don't have the answer to that. I can't, but, it's something that always bothers me.
My name is Anote. I liked the title. I haven't read the book yet, but Audio Famous, one of his collection of verses, when does the Civil War end? And written this book from the point of innocence about, what you witnessed as a child. And of course, the reflections as an adult towards the end of it, where your parents and then your generation and those following had to roll up their sleeves to begin the business of becoming Nigerians all over again. So that question persists. So perhaps for you, I don't know if this is closure for you, which is what some of us have been, I'm in a minority that were at the point where the Biafrans came and swamped the area, and then the federal side came, and also, so we changed hands. Of course, I was a child at the time. So do you see it as closure for you, for the war, perhaps, or not?
I think the war is a closed chapter. I think the war is a closed chapter. I think of myself as a Nigerian or an African, yeah. I don't think that I want to live through another war. If that happens, that question you asked me, I'm gone. I'm not going to live. People don't know what it is. Me, I'm not going to live through another war. And I say that all the time. In fact, one of my cousins was saying to me a while back that the way the Southwest is attacking the Igbos, that maybe it's time we went back to the East. I said, that's fine. But if that time comes, I'm gone. I'll find somewhere and make that place my village. You know what I mean? So we need to, I think what it is that politicians hide behind their incompetence with ethnic disputes. If you're good at what you do, and if you have the welfare of the people in mind, there is no government that can do anything for his own people only in Nigeria. Let's understand that. If your policy is good for your people, other people will benefit from it. So you can't come and say, I'm doing for the Igbos only, or I'm doing for the Yorubas only, or I'm doing for the Efiks only. It can't happen. Once it's a good policy, everybody will key in, and they'll derive benefit from it. So let's understand that, and let's understand that that war that we fought, we really need to examine it and see what the pitfalls of that war were, and see how we move forward so that we have a decent country for all of us.
Let's make it light a bit. Oh, you want to say something?
Hello, sorry. Okay. revisiting the future in the past. People will say also, amen, like, let this not happen again. My question is this: with the era of IPOB and MASOB, a lot of controversies, fights here and there within the Igbos. What can you advise millennials like us and the Gen Zs, like, moving forward? And also, what can we do so that politicians cannot take advantage of these ethnic issues with regards to Biafra? I feel like it has to be reviewed, and I feel like the Nigerian government has to also give an apology or kind of to get this so we can move forward.
Yeah. Okay. I'll read something to you from here. No, not something else. Just to answer his question. Were you going to say something?
Yes. Yes. He has finished. No, okay. You want him to do that first before he speaks. Maybe you
Okay.
so that he will take both of
Yeah.
them.
Okay. I was going to say that when the war was on, I lived in Ibadan. So there's no war in isolation in any country. There's nobody that will not feel the war. And I think in Nigeria, we have to come to the realization that if there is a war, every end, who is going to affect, you know? So people are scared. I think the problem in Nigeria is that we haven't learned our lessons, because this war was like pushed under the carpet. When we were in school, we used to read a bit of history, F.K. Bois. At least we learned a bit. There was war. There was a little portion of the war. It wasn't detailed, but we knew that there was a civil war. After F.K. Bois, I think everything was, I can't remember any history book, and I think it was done on purpose. People didn't know. You'll be surprised that people that didn't know that there was a civil war in Nigeria. So, much younger people. So, I think it was done on purpose. Even in Nigeria now, I look at people who are, they name things after them. These people were people that were part of the war. It can never happen in an advanced country. Look at what is happening in England now, in the US. They are going after slave owners and bringing down
Their statutes.
statutes. And then you are wondering, how many years ago, people are still angry that you are a slave owner. You had this. We haven't even reached that stage in Nigeria. Nobody has answered for this war. People are keeping it quiet. What caused this war? The people that it happened to are suffering till today. They are being punished for that war. So until we face what really happened, we all suffered it. Even the other day when I was talking to somebody that was older than me in Ibadan, he said he remembers when he was in Mary Hill that some people, some friends, he just saw all of a sudden, those friends had to leave. That reading this book, he now realized that that was what happened to his friends. Because the families just had to leave a place where people that were so close, you lost friends, so there's no way war does not affect anybody. So even these politicians or whatever we are doing in Nigeria, we're just wasting our time. 200 years, the story will always be told, because so many people died and they couldn't have died in vain. And we have to learn our lesson. And I think it's because we haven't learned our lesson that all these things are happening in Nigeria. The politicians are still taking advantage of ethnic, yes, saying this person is this person is that, this person is, as my husband said, so many people are married now. The number of people, marriages, intermarriages, there's no way going forward. We just have to sit up and know what is going to happen, because this war will not be thrown under the carpet. People will have to address it and say, why did it happen? So that it will never happen again. Another thing I wanted to say was that because it's a story written by a young person. A lot of people are surprised and they say, oh, how did you remember? How did you remember so much? People don't know that trauma, you remember. You remember things. I remembered it when I was 5 years old. I remember people were worried. I remember conversations of people saying there's a war in Nigeria, what will happen? So you can imagine a child that is actually there. Of course he will remember. He will remember that because it's traumatic. I can tell you what happened recently. Maybe he won't tell you. Somebody that had read the book came to him in court and said, oh, hi, where's the monkey bite? Show me. And he had to roll up his sleeve and say, that's the mark. Just testing, because he probably didn't believe. How can a little boy remember so much? You know? So these are one of the things that we are, but people should remember that if there's a war, it will affect our children, it will affect our grandparents, it will affect all of us, because it's trauma. War is trauma, and it doesn't go away like that. Thank you.
Well, congratulations, Zuchi, and his delectable wife, who is my younger sister from Ibadan. I'm not sure it's that easy to make light, you know, like Tony tried to say, because it's actually a very deep conversation. But my own submission to Uche is that there's no doubt that there's need for proper reintegration in this country. Do you think instituted rotation of power, amongst other things, can help towards this end? And are there any other things that may come into place to help proper integration of Nigerians into the polity?
Constitutional resolution.
You know, we've tried everything in Nigeria. We've tried parliamentary system. We're now doing presidential, American-style presidential. PDP had a rotation that Atiku threw aside. Are you with me? Now, if it's going to work, it's got to be constitutional. I think somebody mooted at one point that you should have one president and 6 vice presidents. I don't know if that will work. And the vice presidents will come from the 6 geopolitical zones. I don't know if that will work. They've talked about, oh, this constitution was given to us by the military. Where there's a will, there's a way. There's nothing that you write for Nigerians that if they want to upset it, they will not upset it. So it's sitting down and having a conversation and understanding that we need to move forward. And how do we move forward? What concerns me now is that we seem to be having a winner-take-all thing in our politics. Winner grabs everything. What that does is that it makes the stakes much higher, and it makes the fight fiercer. Because if you're not part of the winning team, you have for 4, maybe 8 years. So the Nigerian question is, but at the end of the day, you find that Nigerians are peace-loving and easy to govern. Things that happen in this country, in other countries, the country will burn. For instance, fuel subsidy. You can't try it in some countries. The whole place will go ablaze. But we're good. Is that what you want? Fine. Let's try it. That's how Nigerians are. Nigerians are basically happy people. So it shouldn't take much to get things right. It shouldn't take much, you know. One of the things that I wrote, I said here that the Biafran war is long over, but the peace it won remains fragile and full of anxiety. 50 years later, Papa's comments about the issues and developments since then continue to come back to me. My own limited take suggests very strongly that there were no lessons learned from that war by anyone in Nigeria, without exception. Despite all the current ethnic, regional, and religious vociferations, the call to restructure the country is not necessarily a call to arms or a call to carve up the country. It's a call for equity and justice and the case to make things better. So I think all the ethnic militia that you see is an extreme form of protest, that we're not getting a fair shake. And if you guys don't let us get a fair shake, we'll fight. Whether it's MEND, whether it's IPOB, whether it's Boko Haram, whether it's OPC, it's all the same. Everybody wants a fair shake. Everybody wants equity, you know, and fair treatment. So the question is, how do we achieve that? That's the question. That's the way that I look at it. You know, I don't really need to know who the president is if I feel that in my corner I can get my work done and nobody disturbs me. I don't need to know who he is. I don't need to know anybody, anywhere, if I can do my work and go my way quietly. That's what we should be aiming for, I think. Yeah.
So, if we don't have any more questions, I asked you, Prof, if you want. You said no.
Good evening. I thank you for giving upon the power of this conversation.
That's my professor, Professor Rahman. He taught myself and that gentleman who is...
Daddy, you don't remember me? Yeah, I thank you. I've not really read this book, but from the bits I've listened to, I might feel that the contradictions are the things that we need to address and see how, if you overcome those contradictions, maybe you can get the country to go a bit higher. For example, in this discussion, your mother and uncle, whatever, when you don't want you to be part of the conversation, they speak Hausa.
Yeah.
And I've heard that. I know families who are with us in Ife, you know, Uche doesn't speak Yoruba. So when his children want him out of the conversation, they speak Yoruba. And so this happens. So these are contradictions which one has to find a way of addressing. Your uncle was in Jos. However, the people did not know he was evil or anything.
No.
You know? But the people who were attacking him, the narrative is different now. If you go to Jos now,
Yeah.
the dog eat dog. You know, the Birons, wherever they are, or the Christians as they were,
Yeah.
are the ones now